Welcome to the Nightmare Vault. Turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and listen closely. Before you close your eyes, drop a hello in the comments and let us know where you're listening from. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. Let's begin. I wish I hadn't clicked the link. I wish I could unsee it. But I did. And I can't. It started the way most of my nights did back then, mindlessly clicking through forums, scrolling past conspiracy threads, urban legends, the occasional dodgy site that I probably shouldn't have been on. Nothing serious, just the usual internet rabbit holes you end up in when you're half awake at 2 a.m. I'd always been curious about the dark web, not for anything bad, just to see if the stories were real. I'd read about red rooms before, supposed live streams where people were tortured for an audience, but most people agreed they were just myths, some hacker bullshit to scare people off. I never really believed in them. That night, I was on some forum I don't even remember signing up for. A thread popped up. No re-uploads. Enter at your own risk. The title was in bold red, pinned at the top. Hundreds of replies underneath. Most of them just WTF or is this real? I hesitated. Probably just some shock video. Something grim, but not real. My heart was beating a little faster, but curiosity won out. I clicked. The screen went black for a few seconds, then flickered to life. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The video was grainy, like it was filmed on an old CCTV. A dimly lit concrete room, stained walls, a single chair in the center, bolted to the ground. Someone was in it. Their head slumped forward, tied at the wrists and ankles. I stared, waiting for the inevitable reveal that it was some sick hoax, a fake out. Then they looked up, and I swear to God I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. I knew her. Even with the split lip, the swelling, the blood, there was no mistaking her. Her name was Laura. We weren't close, but we'd been in the same classes for years, sat next to each other in maths. She borrowed my pen once and never gave it back. It didn't make sense. Laura wasn't the kind of person to be involved in anything like this. She was normal, boring even. My hands hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed between refreshing the page and closing the tab entirely. My brain kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deep fake, some cruel prank. But deep inside, I knew. The way her eyes darted around the room, the way her chest rose and fell in panicked breaths. This was real. Then the comments started flooding in. Use the hammer. Cut off a finger. Make her beg. Hundreds of them appearing in real time. A chat box filled with commands, people bidding in various cryptocurrencies to decide what happened next. My vision tunneled. My hands felt numb on the mouse. I wanted to stop watching, but I couldn't. A figure stepped into frame, masked, hooded, broad-shouldered. They moved with slow deliberation, dragging something heavy behind them. The chat went wild. Laura was shaking. She tried to speak, but his voice cracked into something raw and broken. And then she looked at the camera. At me. I don't know how, but I felt it. Like he knew I was there, watching. Like she was pleading with me. I slammed my laptop shut. My reflection stared back at me in the dark screen, pale and breathless. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt sick. I sat there, gripping the edge of my desk, trying to convince myself I hadn't just witnessed someone I knew about to be murdered on a live stream. Trying to convince myself it wasn't my fault for watching. Then my phone vibrated. I looked down. An unknown number, a single message. Why did you leave? My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, feeling an ice-cold weight settle in my chest. A pit formed in my stomach. I turned my laptop back on, my hands shaking, refreshing the page. The thread was gone, completely, like it had never existed. I checked the forum, nothing. My history, blank, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, one final text, a photo of my house. The image was grainy, low res, taken from across the street, but it was definitely my house. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for days. I never saw Laura again. There were no news reports, no missing person cases, like she'd never existed. I deleted everything, wiped my laptop, got a new phone, ditched every account I'd ever used. But sometimes, late at night, when my phone buzzes unexpectedly, I get that feeling again, like I'm being watched, like there's a window open somewhere, like someone's waiting for me. Look, I'll start by saying I know how stupid this was. I knew it then too, but I did it anyway. It's easy to sit back and think, I would never, until you're the one staring at some sketchy listing online at 3 a.m., thinking, what's the worst that could happen? A few months ago, I was looking to buy something. Nothing illegal, just something you couldn't get through normal channels. The kind of transaction where questions about origin stories remain deliberately unasked. I found a seller on a dark web forum with glowing reviews. Yes, they have those, little digital stars validating the shadows, and we agreed to meet in person. That was my first mistake. The guy insisted on cash, said he didn't do shipping because of issues in the past. His price was impossibly good, practically begging me to ignore the warning bells chiming softly in the back of my mind. So I agreed. He chose the location, a small parking lot behind an abandoned industrial building about 30 minutes outside the city. Not completely deserted, but lifeless after sundown. No security cameras, no foot traffic, no witnesses. I remember pulling in and feeling the unease settle over me like a damp cloth. Not because of anything obvious, just that sixth sense when you know a place isn't meant to be occupied anymore. Weeds pushed through cracked pavement like skeletal fingers, rust-eaten dumpsters huddled against brick walls, and a few dying streetlights flickered in the distance as if struggling to stay conscious. The kind of spot where, if something went sideways, nobody would hear you call for help. I parked beneath one of the working lights and waited, the yellow glow casting sickly shadows across my dashboard. Checked my phone. No service. Another crimson flag waving frantically. But I was already there, and part of me felt foolish for being nervous. It's just a meet-up, I told myself. Quick exchange, then gone. After about 5 minutes, headlights appeared at the far end of the lot, twin beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. A beat-up sedan, something from the late 90s with mismatched paint, rolled up with deliberate slowness and parked a few spaces away. The driver didn't emerge immediately, just sat there, engine idling, exhaust creating ghost-like tendrils in the cool night air. I raised a hand slightly, a small wave, casual, like I wasn't measuring the distance to my ignition. No response, just the abrupt silence as the engine died, and then waiting. Another minute stretched into eternity before the driver's door finally creaked open. The man who stepped out was wrong. Not threatening in any conventional sense, just incorrect in a way that defied easy description. Maybe it was his movements, careful and precise, like someone learning to walk in a borrowed body. Maybe it was the oversized jacket, zipped to his throat despite the mild evening. But what truly unsettled me was his face, or rather the complete absence of expression it held. No acknowledgement, no nod, nothing. Just this hollow, unreadable stare as he approached, each footstep echoing in the empty lot. Too close, close enough that I could smell his breath, stale cigarettes and something metallic underneath. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope of cash, gripping it tightly in my palm. That should have been the moment, the exchange, the reason I was even there. Instead, he remained still, eyes fixed on me with the patience that sent ice crawling up my spine. Then he tilted his head toward his car. The passenger door had swung open. I hesitated. That wasn't part of this. There was a moment, just a brief flicker of thought, where I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he didn't want to do the exchange out in the open. Maybe he had something heavy, something he needed help lifting. The logical part of my brain clung to anything that could make this feel normal. But nothing about it was normal. He was waiting. The open door was waiting. I took a small, cautious step back, just enough to put space between us, to test the waters. His eyes followed the movement, but his body remained still. I could feel the pressure building, like a slow, tightening coil in my chest, telling me, leave now, leave now, leave now. Then came the second noise, a click. Not from him, from the car. The open passenger door sat ajar, but there was no one inside. And yet, something had triggered the sound. Some unseen shift. A trap. My feet moved before my brain could catch up. A single step turned into a sprint, a desperate, lung-burning rush toward my car. The moment I pulled the door open, something heavy slammed against the window, his hand, palm flat against the glass. Not hitting, not grabbing, just pressing. A pause, a breath. His face was inches from mine, eyes still empty, watching. I turned the key so hard I thought I might snap it. The headlights flooded the lot, and that's when I saw it. The passenger door of his car remained open, but there was nobody inside. No one had ever been there. I don't remember leaving, just the sensation of my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat, my fingers gripping the wheels so hard they ached. The whole drive home I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see those headlights in the distance. They never came. That dark web account was gone the second I got inside. Wiped clean. Never went looking again. The cash I would have spent sat untouched in that envelope for weeks, like a lingering weight pressing on my conscience, before I finally exchanged it for something ordinary. Something real. I never figured out what his endgame was. Maybe he was just toying with me. Maybe he had someone, or something, waiting in the shadows. Or maybe he just wanted to see if I'd get in the car. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder what would have happened if I had. Here's something you might find weird. This happened a few years ago, and even now I get this sick feeling in my stomach when I think about it. I never told anyone the full story, not like this, because I didn't want to sound paranoid. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. I was looking for a place to stay for a long weekend. Somewhere cheap, somewhere out of the way. I was going through the usual rental sites, but everything decent was overpriced or fully booked. Then I remembered this thing I'd heard about in some forum, alternative rental sites, ones that weren't exactly mainstream. It was curiosity, really. I ended up on a site that looked like an old GeoCities page. Black background, neon green text, no branding. Just listings. Some were obvious scams, some had reviews in broken English, and some were straight up bizarre. Stay in a bunker. Off-grid survivalist experience. Be watched for £30 a night. That kind of thing. But then I found this one. Remote cottage, £40 per night, no questions asked. There were pictures, a small old-fashioned place with thick stone walls, a wood-burning stove, and a big overgrown garden. It looked cozy in that weird, eerie way. The description was short. No check-in, just arrive, door will be open, payment via crypto. That should have been my first red flag, but I figured maybe it was just some eccentric old bloke renting out his spare place. I sent the payment, got an automated email with the coordinates, and that was it. The drive up was long, longer than I expected. Roads turned to lanes, lanes turned to dirt tracks, and my sat-nav struggled to keep up. When I finally got there, it was late afternoon, and the place looked exactly like the pictures. The door was unlocked, as promised. Inside, it smelled old, like damp wood and stale air. There was a small kitchen, a fireplace stacked with logs, and a single bedroom with heavy floral curtains. No TV, no Wi-Fi, just a bed, a chair, and a wardrobe that looked older than my grandparents'. It was silent, properly silent. No traffic, no distant voices, just the occasional rustling of trees outside. I remember feeling watched. It was stupid, just that thing your brain does when you're alone in an unfamiliar place. I shook it off, made a cup of tea and settled in. That first night I barely slept. The mattress was too stiff and every sound outside made me tense up. Around 3 a.m. I heard something, a faint click, not a creak, not the wind, something mechanical. I sat up, listened. Nothing. Probably the house settling, I told myself. But in the morning I found something strange. The wardrobe was slightly open. I was sure I hadn't touched it. I checked inside. Just old blankets and a few mismatched hangers. But as I moved them aside, I saw something small tucked in the corner. A tiny hole. I crouched down, peering in. On the other side of that hole was a lens. A camera. My stomach dropped. I yanked the wardrobe away from the wall, and behind it, there was a crude hole leading into the next room. A room that wasn't supposed to be there. The cottage was small. I'd walked through every inch of it, but there was a space, a cavity between the walls, just big enough for someone to squeeze through. That's when I noticed the dust, the floor in that hidden space. It had been disturbed recently. Someone had been in there. I felt sick. My first thought was to leave, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was an old fixture, something left behind by previous owners. I took a breath, tried to steady myself. But then I saw something else, wires running along the skirting board. I followed them, hands shaking, and they led me to a vent near the ceiling. Inside the vent was another camera. That's when I lost it. I grabbed my bag, ran to my car, and didn't look back. I didn't even lock the door. I just drove, speeding down those twisting roads, heart hammering. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone step out of the cottage, watching me leave. When I got home, I went back to the website, but the listing was gone. The entire site was gone. I thought about reporting it, but what would I say? That I found some old cameras in a shady rental I got off the dark web. There was no record of my stay, no contract, no proof. For weeks I felt like I was being watched. I started noticing small things. My door unlocked when I swore I'd locked it. My laptop camera slightly tilted. It was probably just paranoia. Probably. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder who was watching me in that cottage. And worse, did they ever stop? I was never the kind of person to go looking for trouble online. No deep web browsing, no dodgy chat rooms, none of that. I barely even used Reddit. But one night, after a few too many drinks and a conversation with a mate about all the sick stuff lurking on the internet, I got curious. I wish I hadn't. It started with a link in an old forum thread, something about exclusive auctions on the dark web. I expected it to be fake, some overhyped urban legend. The site itself was simple, black background, white text, nothing flashy. It looked more like an outdated classifieds page than some sinister underworld hub. But the categories were what made my stomach drop. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking, and one labeled contracts. I knew I should have clicked away right then, but I didn't. Instead, I scrolled. At first, it seemed like typical hitman for hire nonsense, the kind of rubbish you'd see in movies. But then I saw a listing titled Active Bids and clicked. It was exactly what it sounded like. People placing money on the deaths of others. The details were vague, just initials, rough locations, and starting bids. The highest one had over £50,000 on it. It was sick, obviously, but I was still detached. I was just some bloke reading dodgy internet content, nothing more. Then I refreshed the page and saw my initials, my city, my death. I just sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for the moment my brain would catch up and tell me it was some elaborate joke. But the numbers weren't static. The bid had gone up by another £2,000. Someone had just placed more money on my head. I slammed my laptop shut. My heart was hammering, but I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't me. I mean, my initials weren't exactly unique. And yet, that creeping paranoia settled in. What if it was me? What if someone, right now, was bidding on my death like I was nothing more than an item on a shelf? I checked my locks. Twice. Then I shut off all my lights and sat in the dark, listening. Every creak of the house, every distant footstep on the pavement outside, it all felt like a warning. But the worst part? I still wasn't sure if I was being stupid or if I was already too late. I barely slept that night, but in the morning, with daylight pouring through my windows, it all seemed ridiculous. I even convinced myself to open my laptop again. The site was gone. Dead link, like it had never existed. That should have been the end of it. I should have felt relieved. But then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Auction closed. Payment confirmed. I stared at the message so long my vision blurred. I wanted to believe it was some elaborate scam, a way to terrify idiots like me who stumbled into places they shouldn't be. But what kind of scam didn't ask for money? What kind of joke didn't have a punchline? I called in sick. Didn't leave my flat, didn't answer the door. I considered going to the police, but what could I say? Hi, I was browsing a murder auction site, and now I think I'm being hunted. Even I think that sounds ridiculous. Days passed, and nothing happened. No strange figures lurking outside, no unusual cars following me. Slowly, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe it really was a scam, some automated message designed to freak people out. Maybe the site itself had been some twisted experiment to see how many idiots would take it seriously. Then, one night, as I was heading home from a mate's place, my phone vibrated. Another unknown number. No message this time, just an image. It was me, walking from behind. There was no one else on the street when I turned around, just empty pavement stretching out in either direction. I ran the rest of the way home and didn't leave for days after that. It's been months now. I moved cities, new job, new number, new everything. And yet, sometimes I'll get a message from an unknown number. Never words, never anything obvious. Just a picture, the street corner I passed that morning, the back of my head in a crowded station. I don't check anymore. I just delete them. Because as long as I don't acknowledge it, maybe, just maybe, they'll think I don't know. Maybe they'll move on to someone else. Or maybe they're just waiting until the money runs out. I'd like to say I had a good reason for getting involved with the dark web, but I didn't. It was boredom, mainly. The kind that creeps in when everything in life feels predictable, like you're just going through the motions. I'd been reading about black market forums, about how you could buy pretty much anything if you knew where to look. Weapons, fake IDs, weird antiques. Some of it was obviously a scam, but some felt real. I was never planning on buying anything. I just wanted to see how far I could go. But curiosity has a way of pulling you deeper than you intend. I found the listing by accident. It was buried in a marketplace that mostly sold drugs and stolen electronics. Stuff I had no interest in. But this was different. The title was vague. Exclusive item, serious buyers only. No description, just a price, £1,000. There was something about it that unsettled me. Maybe the lack of details. Maybe the price, too high for a joke but too low for something truly rare. I sent a message. Just one line. What is it? A reply came instantly. An address. No explanation. No instructions. Just a location in an industrial estate outside of town, marked for the following night. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. The place was exactly what you'd expect for something like this. An old warehouse, half abandoned. The kind of place where you'd expect to find burned out cars and used needles. I parked a few streets away and walked in on foot, telling myself I could leave at any time. That this was just a stupid little adventure. There was a van parked near the warehouse, unmarked, headlights off. A single floodlight buzzed overhead, throwing long, sickly yellow shadows across the cracked pavement. No signs, no people. Just that van, sitting there. I hesitated. My brain was already telling me to turn back, but then I saw the crate. It was sitting just outside the open warehouse door. Plain wooden slats with no markings. That had to be it. The item. No one else around. Just me and that box. I don't know what I expected. Gold bars? A stolen painting? Some kind of antique relic? But when I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The lid had been nailed shut, but gaps in the wood let out a smell. An awful, sour stench, like rotting meat. And then I heard it. A rustling. A slow, deliberate shift, like something inside was adjusting. My stomach dropped. That was the moment I should have left, just turned around and walked away. But instead I did the worst thing possible. I reached out and pulled at the slats, trying to get a look inside. I got my wish. The crate wasn't packed with drugs or stolen goods. It wasn't even full. There was just one thing inside. A man. No, not just a man. A person bound in plastic, their arms contorted unnaturally, their head tilted at an impossible angle. Eyes wide, mouth stuffed with rags. The only part of them moving was their chest, a weak, shallow rise and fall beneath the film of plastic. They were alive, barely. I staggered back, my throat closing up. This wasn't an item. This was a person about to be sold, or worse. And that's when I realized how stupid I'd been. The van, the empty lot, the open warehouse door leading into blackness. This wasn't a marketplace where you placed an order and picked up the goods. This was a drop-off, and I'd just made myself part of it. I turned, moving fast, heart hammering. But I'd barely taken a step when I heard a noise behind me. Not from the crate, from the darkness of the warehouse. Footsteps, slow, measured. I stopped breathing. I could feel them watching me, whoever they were. Not rushing, not panicked, just waiting, calculating. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move, because I knew the second I bolted, they'd react. I'd hear the slam of the van door, the pound of boots on pavement, so I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and walked, slowly, back the way I came, not looking at the crate, not looking at the warehouse, just walking. The footsteps didn't follow, not right away. I made it to my car before I dared to look back. The van was still there, motionless. The crate still sat under the floodlight, silent now. But the warehouse door, it was closing. Someone inside was pulling it shut. Not in a rush, not to chase me, just sealing the place back up, like nothing had happened, like it had never been open. I don't remember the drive home. I barely remember getting into bed, lying there, staring at the ceiling until dawn. All I could think about was that person in the crate. What happened to them after I left? Did they get sold? Killed? Did I just walk away from a murder? I never went back to that site. I deleted everything. I stopped messing around with the dark web completely. But that night stays with me. Sometimes I wonder if I was being watched the whole time, if I was some kind of test, if I'd reacted differently, if I'd tried to help, or called the police. Would I have ended up in a crate of my own? I don't want to know the answer. I don't usually go to underground parties. But a few years ago, I was young and naive, hanging around in dark web forums where people talked about exploits, system bypasses, and all kinds of shady tech stuff. I wasn't a hacker, not really, just someone who liked lurking and picking up bits of info. One night, I got an invite in my inbox. No details, just a time and a street name in East London. It felt sketchy, but my curiosity got the better of me. When I got there, I found a basement-level bar that didn't even have a sign, just a plain metal door and a doorman who barely glanced at me before letting me in. The place was dimly lit, filled with the glow of monitors and quiet conversations. Hooded figures sat hunched over laptops, eyes flickering between their screens and the people around them. Every now and then, a CCTV feed would pop up on one of the walls, showing live footage from the street outside. I tried to keep my head down, just observing. I wasn't looking for trouble. But then I noticed someone watching me. He was sitting alone in the corner, wearing a charcoal beanie and a battered bomber jacket. Nothing about him stood out, except for the fact that when I walked past, he turned slightly and said my name. Not my username, my real, full name. I froze. My stomach dropped. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, like he'd been expecting me. Against my better judgment, I sat down. At first, the conversation felt normal, almost casual, but then he started mentioning things about me, small details, things I hadn't thought about in years, the university I went to, a band I was obsessed with back in 2014, the coffee shop where I liked to work sometimes. Then he mentioned my old apartment, the one I moved out of 2 years ago, the one I'd never talked about online. That's when the feeling of unease turned into full-blown dread. The walls felt like they were closing in. He kept going, listing off things I'd done recently, where I'd used my bank card, websites I'd visited that morning. It didn't feel like a trick. It felt like he had been watching me for a long time. My brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe he had access to old social media posts. Maybe this was some elaborate scare tactic. But then my phone buzzed. It was an email, sent from my own account. Subject: you shouldn't be here. Body: I can see you. My hands went cold. I looked up and he was still staring at me, his face unreadable, like he was waiting for me to react. I didn't say anything. I just stood up, chair scraping against the floor, and walked out as fast as I could without running. The air outside felt different, like I had stepped into a world where something was just off. As I hurried to the train station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I caught my reflection in a darkened window, it felt like there was a delay, like my reflection was just a fraction slower than it should have been. When I got home, I changed every password, ran every security scan I could think of, checked my accounts. Nothing was out of place. But over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Unexplained logins from foreign IP addresses, my cursor moving slightly on its own, random songs playing on my phone in the middle of the night. I wiped everything, deleted accounts, stopped visiting forums, and for a while, things were quiet. But even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes to my phone lighting up in the dark. No messages, no notifications, just the screen glowing, like something on the other side is waiting for me to notice. And every time I wonder if he's still watching. I should have known better. The signs were there from the start. It was late, I was knackered, and I needed a cheap place to crash for the night. Hotels were out of my budget, so I turned to one of those dodgy rental sites, not the big name ones, but the kind that don't really ask too many questions. The listing was basic. A single room in a detached house, cheap and available immediately. No reviews, but at the time, that didn't seem important. I was desperate. I booked it, paid up front. The host, someone named Graham, messaged me the address with a single line. Come alone, no guests. Weird phrasing, but I shrugged it off. People have their rules. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places that looks normal enough at first glance, but feels off the longer you stare at it. The street was empty, the kind of empty that makes you wonder if people even live there. No lights in the windows, no parked cars, just rows of darkened houses, identical in their silence. The house itself was old, detached, with a small front garden overgrown with weeds. A single porch light buzzed weakly overhead. The front door was unlocked, just slightly ajar, like it had been left that way for me. I remember hesitating before stepping inside. That moment sticks with me. The hesitation, the way my body seemed to register something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. But I was exhausted, and the wind had that bitter autumn bite to it. So I stepped in, shutting the door behind me. Inside, the place was strange. Not messy, not dirty, just off. The walls were bare, no pictures, no decorations. The furniture was minimal, almost staged, like a house that had been lived in once, but not for a long time. The air had that stale, unused quality, like an old rental car. I noticed the locks immediately, not on the front door, which I'd just shut, but on the inside doors. Heavy-duty deadbolts on every interior door, kitchen, bathroom, even the bedroom I'd been given. I stood there for a moment, staring at the locks, turning over a thought in my head that I didn't quite want to finish. I brushed it off. Some people are just paranoid. Maybe he'd had bad tenants before. I went to my room. It was small, just a bed, a wardrobe, and a nightstand with a lamp. No TV, no personal touches. The sheets smelled freshly washed, but wrong, like they'd been stored somewhere damp. The bedroom door had a lock on the inside, which I did like. Made me feel safer. Then I heard it. A faint click. I froze, listening. Another click, further away. Then the unmistakable slide of a bolt locking into place. Someone was locking the doors. I stepped out into the hallway. The house was silent, too silent. That thick, unnatural kind of quiet where your ears start ringing just to fill the space. I turned back towards the front door, just to check, and my stomach dropped. There was a new lock on it, one I hadn't noticed when I came in, a solid, industrial-looking bolt near the top, one that could only be locked from the inside, and it was locked now. I hadn't locked it. Someone else had. That was the moment my brain finally caught up. I wasn't alone. I didn't want to move, but I forced myself. Slow steps, keeping my breathing even, trying to listen past the pounding of my own heartbeat. I crept towards the hallway, towards the kitchen. I needed to find another way out, a back door, a window, something. As I passed the bathroom, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A shape, a sliver of movement in the gap beneath the door. Someone was standing behind it. I didn't think. I just reacted, bolted back to my room and slammed the door, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone, but I already knew what I'd see. No signal, no Wi-Fi. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hall, stopping outside my door. The doorknob turned. It didn't rattle or jerk. Whoever was on the other side wasn't trying to force their way in. They were testing it, checking. And then came the worst part. A single, quiet knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just polite, patient. I sat there gripping my phone like it could somehow protect me, barely breathing. Then, after a long, agonizing minute, the footsteps retreated. I didn't move. Not for a long time. Eventually, when the silence stretched on long enough that I started doubting myself, I risked creeping towards the window. It was small, but maybe I could squeeze through. And then I saw it. The window had bars on the outside. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just some dodgy rental. This was a trap. I didn't sleep. I sat there all night, waiting, listening. But nothing happened. No more footsteps, no more knocks. Just that horrible, waiting silence. When the sun finally came up, I took a chance. Cracked the door open. The house was empty. The front door was unlocked again. I didn't stop to think about it. I ran. Didn't even grab my bag. Just bolted straight into the street, gasping in the fresh morning air like I'd just surfaced from drowning. There was no sign of Graham. No car in the driveway. No movement in the house. It was like it had never happened. I never reported it. What would I even say? That I booked some dodgy rental and got scared? That some stranger might have been in the house with me? There was nothing to prove it. No evidence. Just a room with clean sheets and a door that locked from both sides. But I know what I felt. I know that someone else was there that night, watching, waiting. And the worst part, that listing, it's still up. You know when you look back on something and every red flag is obvious in hindsight? That's what this is for me. I was skint, desperate for any kind of work, and I ignored every warning sign that should have had me walking in the opposite direction. But when you're broke, your standards drop, way lower than they should. It started with a listing on a forum I probably shouldn't have been on in the first place. Not the full-blown dark web, but one of those sketchy job boards that sit in a grey area. The ad was simple. Night shift warehouse work. High pay. No experience needed. Apply via email. No company name. No details. Just an email address and a promise of easy cash. It reeked of a scam, but I was behind on rent and staring down the barrel of an eviction notice. So I sent an email. Got a reply within the hour. No interview questions, No CV request, just an address, a time, and instructions to dress in dark clothing. That should have been the first red flag. Instead, I convinced myself it was just some under-the-table gig, maybe dodgy, but not dangerous. Probably moving knockoff trainers or stolen electronics. The address led me to an industrial estate on the outskirts of town, one of those places that feels abandoned even when it isn't. It was late, past midnight, and the roads were empty. The unit I was looking for was at the very back, away from the streetlights. No signage, no markings, just a roll-up door that was half open, spilling dim light onto the concrete. There was no reception area, no office, just a vast cold space stacked with unlabeled wooden crates. A single overhead light buzzed in the center, casting long shadows. I half expected someone to meet me at the door, but there was no one. Just a metal chair sitting beneath the light. A piece of paper taped to the backrest read, "Wait here." I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. Not just the setting, but the complete lack of human presence. But I was already there, and my bank account was screaming at me to stay. So I sat. Minutes passed, then more. The silence became oppressive. No hum of forklifts, no chatter, just the occasional groan of metal as the wind pushed against the warehouse doors. My breath sounded too loud. The longer I sat there, the more exposed I felt, like I was on display. Then came the sound. A slow, deliberate creak from somewhere in the darkness. Not the wind, not random. It came from deeper inside the warehouse, beyond the reach of the overhead light. My pulse kicked up, but I forced myself to stay still. I wasn't about to let paranoia cost me the job. At least that's what I told myself. Another sound, closer. A shuffle of movement, just beyond the crates. I turned my head slightly, straining my ears. And that's when I caught it. Just the faintest hint of breathing. Not mine. Someone was watching me. I should have left right then, stood up, walked out, and never looked back. But my brain did what it always does in moments like this. It rationalized. Maybe it's the manager, checking me out before introducing himself. Maybe it's just another worker. Maybe I'm overreacting. And then I saw them. A figure, barely visible between two crates. They were standing still, too still. Their silhouette blending into the darkness. No movement, no sound, just watching. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I told myself it was nothing, that they'd step forward any second, introduce themselves, break the tension. But they didn't. They just stood there. The figure didn't respond. But they did move. Not towards me, not away. Just a subtle shift, like adjusting their weight. Enough to make me realize there wasn't just one. Another shape to my right. Another behind the crates. 3, maybe more. All of them silent. I stood up slowly, my legs like lead. My body was screaming at me to run, but I didn't want to provoke them. I forced a casual nod, as if I wasn't feeling the pure ice-cold terror flooding my veins, and started backing away. No one stopped me. I turned towards the exit. The roll-up door was still open. Not far. I could make it. Then came the worst sound of my life. A metallic slam. The roll-up door crashing shut behind me. I bolted, sprinting towards the door, my boots thudding against the concrete. I reached it, grabbed the handle, yanked, locked. Footsteps behind me, multiple, fast. I spun, scanning for anything, an exit, a weapon, anything. My breath came in sharp gasps. They were closer now, stepping into the light. I finally saw them properly. No uniforms, no work gear, just dark clothing, hoods up, faces masked. Their hands were gloved. No words, no demands, just slow, deliberate steps closing in. I did the only thing I could. I ran sideways, deeper into the warehouse, weaving between crates, searching for another way out. There had to be a back door, a fire exit, something. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Behind me, the sound of pursuit. No shouting, no commands, just boots on concrete, relentless, closing the distance. I don't know how long I ran. 30 seconds? A minute? Everything blurred into a mess of darkness and adrenaline. But then, salvation. A ladder leading up to a mezzanine. I didn't think. I just climbed, taking the rungs 2 at a time. At the top, a catwalk stretched across the warehouse, and at the far end, a door. I ran. Below they followed, one of them already grabbing the ladder. I could hear the metal rattling, feel the vibrations as they climbed. I reached the door, slammed against it. Locked. For one breathless second, I thought that was it. Then I saw it. A fire escape through a smashed window just a few feet away. I didn't hesitate. I jumped. The drop was brutal. I hit the metal stairs, pain exploding through my side. But I scrambled to my feet and kept running. I didn't stop. Not when I reached the street. Not when I hit the main road. Not until I was home, barricaded inside my flat, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. I never found out who they were. Never found out what would have happened if they'd caught me. But I know one thing. That wasn't a job interview. I should have stopped the moment I saw the website, not because of anything obvious. There were no flashing red flags, no illegal items for sale banners, just a sleek, minimalist interface. It almost looked respectable, like a high-end auction house. Except, this wasn't eBay, and it wasn't selling antiques. I don't even remember how I found it. Probably one of those late-night internet rabbit holes, following a thread about the most disturbing corners of the dark web. I never took that stuff seriously. Urban legends about red rooms and hitmen for hire always sounded like internet horror stories, designed to scare people away from places they shouldn't be. But this was different. It felt real. The site was called the Hollow Archive, and its tagline chilled me even before I understood why. Every object has a story. There was no search bar, no categories, just a long scrolling list of lots. Each entry had a number, a single photograph, and a brief description. At first glance, they looked like antiques, watches, jewelry, old photographs, personal effects. But the descriptions weren't about craftsmanship or provenance. They were about deaths. Lot 186, silver pendant recovered from drowning victim, Thames River, 2018. Lot 227, leather billfold, extracted post-mortem, Manchester stabbing, 2015. Lot 312, wedding ring set from double suicide, undisclosed location, 2021. I felt a slow, creeping revulsion. These weren't vintage heirlooms. They were relics of tragedy. I should have left the site then, closed the tab, cleared my history, but I didn't. I kept scrolling. At some point, I noticed something else, something worse. The newer the item, the higher the price. The more violent the death, the more interest it seemed to generate. Some listings had hundreds of bids. The page refreshed. A new lot appeared at the top. Lot 405, unopened parcel, received posthumously, sender deceased. No details. Just a photo of a brown padded envelope, the kind used for small packages. No visible address. A postmark partially obscured by the auction site's watermark. Something about it made my skin crawl. Unlike the other items, this wasn't a possession recovered after death. This was something sent before it happened. I don't know why I did it. Morbid curiosity, I suppose. I placed a bid, low enough that I didn't expect to win. 3 hours later, I got the email. Congratulations. Your bid for lot 405 has been accepted. Payment instructions enclosed. It didn't ask for card details, only cryptocurrency. Anonymized. By then, my curiosity had curdled into something else, something colder. The moment my bid was accepted, the whole thing became real. I nearly backed out, but part of me had to know. The package arrived 4 days later. No return address. Just my name, my real name, typed onto the label. I don't remember bringing it inside. I don't remember sitting down at my desk, staring at it. But I do remember the feeling in my stomach, like something had gone terribly wrong. It wasn't sealed with tape, just a simple adhesive strip. I peeled it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single object, a USB drive, nothing else. No note, no explanation. I almost didn't plug it in. Almost. The drive contained one file. No name, no extension, just a string of numbers. I opened it, a video. At first, just static. Then a dimly lit room, a figure seated in front of the camera. A man, early 40s maybe, pale, unshaven, his breathing shallow, his eyes flickering between the camera and something off screen. And then he said my name, not just my first name, my full name. He repeated it twice, voice tight with fear. Then he held up an envelope, the same padded one sitting on my desk. He whispered something, too quiet to hear, shaking now, hands trembling. The camera shook, like someone had stepped toward him. His breath hitched. Then, movement, a blur of shadow behind him. The moment he turned, the screen cut to black. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen video player. The timestamp said it had been recorded 3 days ago. I ejected the drive, put it back in the envelope, and threw the whole thing in the bin. Then I took the bin outside, dumped it in the communal rubbish chute, and walked away without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes flicking towards something I couldn't see. By morning, the auction site was gone. I tried every link, every archived version, every back door I could think of. Nothing. No trace it had ever existed. That was 6 months ago. I still don't know who that man was. I don't know why he said my name, or who was in the room with him. I don't know what happened after the video cut out. But sometimes, when I check my emails, I see an unread message in my spam folder. No subject, no sender, just a single attachment. Another video. I never open them. It started on a random Wednesday night. One of those nights where you're up too late, mindlessly clicking through the internet, knowing you should sleep but just not. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just bouncing between forums, YouTube videos, and Reddit threads. At some point, I stumbled onto a post buried deep in a dark web forum about hidden surveillance sites, not the kind used by government agencies or security firms. These were illicit streams, hacked CCTV feeds, baby monitors, home security cameras. The kind of thing you don't just stumble upon on the regular internet. Some showed empty rooms, eerie in their stillness, but others, they had people in them, people who had no idea they were being watched. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was illegal, the kind of thing that could get you on a list just for looking. But curiosity is a funny thing, and at that moment, I justified it as just another anonymous click in the abyss. I hovered over a link, hesitated for half a second, and then clicked. The site was bare bones, just a black background with a grid of grainy video feeds, most labeled with vague location markers like living room, USA, or back garden, unknown. The layout was crude, almost amateurish, with a chat box on the side where anonymous users posted timestamps and cryptic comments. At first, it was nothing. Empty corridors, dimly lit shops, the occasional dog trotting through someone's kitchen. Then, one feed caught my eye. Flat 2B, UK. It looked like a normal living room. A sofa, a coffee table covered in takeaway containers, a telly frozen on a paused Netflix screen. The only thing off was the timestamp. It was live, right now. I sat there watching, feeling a strange guilt, like I was trespassing in someone's home. Then, movement. A man entered the frame. He was alone, mid-30s maybe, in a hoodie and joggers, barefoot. He looked comfortable, distracted, scrolling on his phone as he sat on the sofa. I almost backed out of the sight then. It felt too intrusive, too real. But something in the chat caught my attention. "Wait for it," it said. I frowned. Wait for what? The man didn't seem to notice anything. He put his phone down, stretched, then got up and walked towards the kitchen, disappearing out of frame. A few seconds passed. The chat refreshed with a new message. It simply said, "Door." I swear my stomach dropped. I glanced back at the feed. There was someone else in the flat. A figure had appeared at the edge of the frame, standing just inside the front door. Dressed in black, hood pulled low, not moving, not making a sound, just standing there, watching. My first thought was that it was a prank, some setup for a viral video. But the way the intruder stood there, perfectly still, arms relaxed at their sides, it wasn't theatrical, it was deliberate, it was real. I wanted to believe the man in the flat would notice, that he'd step back into frame, spot the intruder, and shout, laugh, something. But he didn't. He was still in the kitchen, just out of view. The chat was going insane. Messages like, "He doesn't know," "Oh fuck," and "He's so dead." I reached for my phone, my first instinct to call someone, anyone, but I didn't know where this was. Flat 2B meant nothing, no city, no street, nothing useful. I stared at the screen, helpless, as the intruder took a slow step forward. The man returned a few seconds later, oblivious. He didn't even look towards the door, just strolled back to the sofa, picked up his phone, sat down. The figure was behind him now, just standing there, close enough to touch him. I held my breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the intruder moved. Fast. Precise. A gloved hand clamped over the man's mouth as they yanked him backwards off the sofa. His legs flailed, phone flying from his hand, crashing onto the coffee table. The chat exploded, but I barely noticed. My heart was hammering. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him struggle, thrashing against the grip. His muffled screams barely made it through the bad microphone feed. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. He was dragged out of frame. The struggle faded, but I could still hear it. The scuffing of feet against carpet, a choked, gasping sound. Then nothing. Silence. The feed was still live. The flat was still there, unchanged. A few overturned takeaway boxes on the floor. The man's phone screen flickering on the coffee table, but no movement, no sound. I felt sick. I slammed my laptop shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was some sick setup, a horror ARG or a twisted prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I didn't sleep that night. I kept expecting to hear a noise at my own door, to see movement in the corner of my vision. Every shadow felt wrong. Every creak of the floorboards made my skin crawl. The next day, I tried to find the site again, to convince myself I'd imagined it. But the link was gone. No trace of it in my history. Nothing in the forums. Like it had never existed. I never found out who the man was, never saw anything on the news. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if someone else was watching me, if my own flat was just another feed, sitting in someone's grid with a label I'll never see. I don't talk about this often, partly because I don't like remembering it, but mostly because no one ever believes me. I wouldn't believe me either if I hadn't lived through it. It started with boredom. That's how these things always start, isn't it? I'd been deep into tech stuff for years. Coding, hacking, the usual. Not in a criminal way, more out of curiosity. I liked testing boundaries, seeing how far I could go before hitting a wall. That's how I found the auction site. It wasn't easy to access. You couldn't just Google it. It took weeks of lurking on certain forums, piecing together bits of information, running everything through layers of VPNs and proxies. Even then, I almost backed out. Not because I was scared, but because it sounded like bullshit. People whispered about this place like it was some underground high society event, where billionaires bought things money shouldn't be able to buy. Weapons, stolen art, rare drugs. Some even hinted at worse things, but those threads always got deleted fast. When I finally got in, it looked underwhelming. Just a black screen with a login. No flashy graphics, no edgy slogans. Just a box asking for credentials. And somehow that made it worse. I wasn't there to buy anything. I just wanted to see. Once inside, it was like any other auction site. Categories, timers, bidding options. But the listings weren't for paintings or antiques. They were for experiences. Private dinners with unreachable people. Untraceable services. One listing, which I still remember word for word, simply read, "A night of complete control. No consequences." It made my stomach turn. I kept browsing, mostly out of morbid curiosity, until I saw something different. A live auction. Private event invitation. Exclusive guest experience. There were no details, just a promise of an invitation to a high society gathering where the world's elite bid on luxury beyond comprehension. Dramatic as hell. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to prove it was all a scam. Maybe I was just a reckless idiot. I placed a bid. Nothing outrageous, just enough to see what would happen. And I won. Within an hour, I got an email. It was shockingly normal, formatted like a professional event invite, even included an RSVP link. The location was vague, just a general area in London. No venue name, just an instruction that details would be sent 24 hours prior. I still remember how smug I felt. It had to be a con, probably some underground club trying to make itself sound mysterious. The email with the final location arrived the next night, a private venue somewhere near the Docklands. The instructions were formal. Dress code, no +1, surrendering phones at the door for security reasons. That should have been the first red flag, but I rationalized it. Exclusive events do that, right? High-profile guests don't want people sneaking photos. So I went. The venue was a repurposed warehouse, modernized, with dark-tinted windows and no signage. The kind of place you'd walk past without a second glance. Inside, it was eerily pristine. A long, dimly lit hallway led to a main lounge area, where other guests mingled, all dressed in expensive suits and evening gowns. I felt immediately out of place. A woman in a black uniform took my phone, placing it into a velvet-lined case before locking it away. She handed me a small silver token, something to collect my phone at the end of the night. That was the second red flag. The third was the name tag they gave me, or rather, the lack of one. Everyone else had a name displayed on their chest. Mine just had a number, 47. I almost asked about it, but then I noticed something else. Every so often a server would approach a guest and lean in close, whispering something just for them. Then, that guest would quietly excuse themselves and follow the server through a side door. It happened maybe 4 or 5 times. No one acknowledged it. No one questioned it. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I wandered around, trying to listen in on conversations, but they were all vague. Mentions of assets, acquisitions, unrestricted opportunities. The kind of language that sounds important, but means nothing. Then, a man I hadn't noticed before stepped onto a small platform at the far end of the room. He was well dressed, older, carrying himself with the kind of arrogance that suggested he wasn't used to being questioned. The doors I'd seen people disappear through swung open. A procession of servers entered, each leading someone in front of the crowd. People, standing in a line, expressionless, silent, and wearing tags just like mine. The room went quiet. Then the bidding began. I remember standing there frozen, as the first item was described in cold clinical detail. Age, physical attributes, special qualities. The numbers climbed quickly. I wasn't breathing. I reached into my pocket for my phone before remembering. I didn't have it. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, a hand closed around my wrist. A different server this time. Smiling. Too polite. I tried to pull away, but before I could, something cold and sharp pressed against my side. The grip tightened. The pressure against my ribs increased. Not enough to break skin, but enough to warn me. I was led, half paralyzed, towards the line. Someone, one of the guests, caught my eye. He was watching me, smirking, amused, like he'd seen this happen before, like he'd expected it. That was when I knew. I wasn't a guest. I was an item. The last thing I remember clearly is standing under those blinding lights, feeling like my skin was turning inside out from the sheer wrongness of it. Then a number was called. Mine, and the room erupted in offers. I don't remember escaping. Just fragments, a struggle, a door left ajar, running until my lungs felt like they'd burst. I don't even know how I made it home. I never found the site again. The invitation email disappeared from my inbox. The venue, when I tried to locate it weeks later, wasn't there, like it had never existed. But I did exist, and someone, somewhere, had been willing to pay for me. I don't think about what would have happened if they'd won. There's a certain kind of curiosity that's not worth indulging. The kind that pulls you towards something you don't actually want to see. But you look anyway, because some small morbid part of you can't help it. A few years ago, I went down a deep web rabbit hole. It started as a joke, really. Those late-night discussions with mates about how easy it is to access the darkest corners of the internet. We weren't hackers or criminals, just idiots with Tor browsers and too much free time. Most of what we found was disappointing. Just weird forums, dodgy markets selling stolen accounts, a lot of overhyped nonsense. But then I found something that stuck with me, something I wish I could unsee. The site was called The Chamber. No logos, no flashy design, just a blank page with a black background and a single line of text. High-value human assets, no middlemen, real-time availability. I remember staring at those words, trying to work out what it meant. It was vague enough that it could have been some scam, but clicking through the links quickly erased that thought. It wasn't an auction site, not exactly. There were no bidding wars or carts, just a list of organs, each with a price, a status, and a live feed. The feeds are what made it real. Each one showed a different setup. Some were grainy, black and white, like low-quality CCTV. Others were in dimly lit rooms, almost medical in their sterility. and in each there was someone lying on a table, restrained. Their faces were never shown, always cropped at the neck or obscured by medical drapes. Some of them were completely still, unconscious. Others weren't. I remember the exact moment my stomach turned. One of the listings had a price next to it. £15,000, kidney, fresh, viable, unclaimed. Next to it was a button that said stream. I clicked. The video loaded, showing a man strapped to a gurney, shirtless, ribs pressing against pale skin. His arms twitched against the leather restraints, his fingers curling and uncurling like he was trying to grasp something just out of reach. I convinced myself he was unconscious, just moving involuntarily, but then he made a sound, a small, choked whimper, barely audible. I told myself it was fake. It had to be. Some kind of sick staged performance, but my chest felt tight as I scrolled. Every listing was the same. Livers, corneas, hearts, each with a live feed attached. Some of them had an active status. Others just said collected. I should have closed the tab, but I kept looking. The more I scrolled, the worse it got. Some of the feeds showed people with fresh stitches, their skin still raw and angry, as if they'd been put back together like patchwork. Others showed bodies left limp, unmoving, either dead or drugged beyond recognition. My breath felt thick, heavy, like I was breathing in something toxic just by looking. Then I made a mistake. I clicked on a tab I hadn't noticed before, upcoming procedures. A new page loaded with a single line at the top. Customers may observe live extractions by request. The list beneath it had timestamps. The next one was in 3 minutes. I don't know why I stayed. Morbid curiosity, stupidity, whatever it was, I watched the timer tick down. At 0, the page refreshed. A new stream appeared. I clicked before I could second guess myself. This one was different, clearer, almost professional. The camera was mounted high, angled down. The person on the table was awake. His breathing was fast, erratic, chest rising and falling in quick, panicked bursts. His wrists were bound, but his head was free, and he kept twisting, jerking, trying to see what was behind him. Then a figure entered the frame. Gloved hands, a surgical mask. No hesitation. The man on the table started thrashing harder. He tried to scream, but something was blocking his mouth. A gag, maybe. The gloved hands pressed down on his shoulder, forcing him still. Then the scalpel appeared. My heart was hammering, hands sweaty on the keyboard. I slammed my laptop shut and sat there, breath shaky. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but I knew the truth. I wiped my history, reset my browser, and uninstalled Tor that same night. Even so, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those restraints, the stitched-up skin, the man's wide, frantic eyes. A week later, I bought a new laptop. It didn't help, because a month after that, I got an email. No sender, no subject, just 2 words in the body. Still watching. I haven't been back on the deep web since. I don't really know where to start with this, because even now, thinking about it makes my stomach twist. But I'll tell you this much. Whatever morbid curiosity you have about the dark web, kill it. Let it die right here. Because I learned the hard way that when you go looking for something sinister, sometimes it finds you first. This happened about 2 years ago. I was going through a rough patch, messy breakup, job I hated, no real direction. I spent a lot of time online, going down rabbit holes, lurking in places I probably shouldn't have. You know, those late-night internet spirals where you're clicking on weird links just to see where they lead? That's how I found it. It was just a basic forum post, buried in a thread about urban legends. Someone had mentioned a ghost hotel, a place that supposedly didn't exist on any official booking sites, but could be reserved through a single, unlisted link. The whole thing sounded like bollocks, but someone had replied with the URL. I clicked it without thinking. The website was plain, almost like one of those sketchy travel sites from the early 2000s. A single grainy photo of a room, a bed, a side table, dim yellow lighting. £30 a night, no ID required. Seemed dodgy, but I was curious. Maybe it was some off-the-books Airbnb, some rundown place landlords were trying to rent under the radar. That's what I told myself. I booked one night. Looking back, I should have known something was off when I never got a confirmation email. No address either, just a text with a time and location. Room 405, Oak Ridge Lodge. Key will be under the mat. Oak Ridge Lodge wasn't a lodge. It was the kind of place you'd expect people to overdose in. A squat, 4-story building, tucked between a petrol station and an abandoned car wash. Fluorescent lights buzzed over the peeling brown carpet. The receptionist's desk was empty, but the key was right where the message had said it would be. The moment I stepped into room 405, I felt off. Not scared, just unsettled. It was depressingly plain. Beige walls, single bed, dodgy-looking kettle on the desk. The only thing that stood out was the camera mounted above the TV. One of those old-school security cameras, small red light blinking. I remember thinking it was weird, but maybe it was just for liability. I locked the door, chucked my bag on the bed, and pulled out my laptop. That's when I noticed the Wi-Fi wasn't just unsecured. It was already connected. No login, no password. Just Oak Ridge guest. Normally, I'd think that was convenient. Instead, it just added to the strangeness of the place. I should have left. I was scrolling through random sites when my screen glitched. Just for a second, a flicker, barely noticeable, like static interference. Then my browser froze. A new tab opened by itself. Live broadcast starting soon. I stared at it, confused. I hadn't clicked anything. It was a black screen, except for a countdown timer. 1 minute, 43 seconds. Weird. Probably some pop-up ad or phishing site. I tried to close it. Nothing happened. The timer kept counting down. 1 minute and 12 seconds. I shut the laptop. Stood up. Poured myself some water from the kettle. Told myself I was being stupid. When I sat back down and reopened my laptop, the black screen had changed. The countdown was gone. Instead, it showed a live feed of my hotel room. Not a recording, not a glitchy webcam reflection, a real-time stream, from a high angle, the exact angle of the camera above the TV. I froze. My mouth went dry. I looked up at the camera, looked back at the screen. I waved my hand. The movement mirrored instantly. My brain was scrambling for an explanation. Hotel security? Some creepy owner spying on guests? But if that were the case, why was it being streamed on a site I never opened? Then I noticed something that made my blood go cold. In the bottom right corner of the screen was a chat box, and people were typing. The camera angle zoomed in. I swear my heart stopped. I felt the room shrink, like the walls were pressing in. My laptop wasn't hacked. This was set up for me. I was meant to book this room. I slammed the lid shut and stood up so fast my chair fell over. My skin was crawling. Someone was watching me, right now. And then the TV turned on. Static at first, then an image, a hallway. My hallway. The camera was outside my door. I watched as one by one the overhead lights began to switch off. Click, 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 getting closer to my room. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag, yanked the door open. The hallway was pitch black. Then my phone vibrated. A new message. No caller ID. I closed the door and turned back to the room. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Multiple footsteps, moving fast. A dull thud came from the door. Then another. The handle rattled hard enough to shake the entire thing in its frame. Someone, or several people, were trying to force their way in. The lock held at first, but I could hear them working at it. Something metal scraping against the keyhole. Not a key, something else. The gap under the door went dark as a shadow passed over it. Then came the worst part. The light from the peephole disappeared. Someone was standing directly on the other side. The sound of metal grinding against the lock was getting louder. Too loud, too determined. I bolted for the window, 4 stories up, no fire escape, but a ledge, maybe a meter wide. I didn't hesitate. I forced it open and climbed out, pressing myself against the cold concrete as I shuffled toward the next room. I was halfway there when I heard the door finally give way behind me. Heavy footsteps rushed in. I didn't look. I made it to the neighboring window and started pounding on the glass. No response. The curtains were drawn. The room was empty. I kept moving. Another window. Another. I didn't stop until I reached the far end of the building, where I could drop onto the roof of the petrol station below. I ran until my legs nearly gave out. I don't know who was in that room with me. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed even a second longer. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that countdown timer. 1 minute, 12 seconds. That was how long I had. They gave me a head start. I used to mess around on the darker corners of the internet when I was younger. Not for anything weird, at least, not at first. It was just that morbid curiosity that kicks in when you realize there are places online that don't play by the same rules as the surface web. Forums where people talked openly about things you weren't supposed to talk about. I never took it seriously though. It was just something to do when I was bored. But there was one night that changed how I saw all of it. I was in this hidden chat room, one of those invite-only places that prided itself on being for enthusiasts only. Enthusiasts of what, exactly, was left vague. But after spending enough time lurking, I figured out the gist. It was a gathering place for people fascinated by red rooms, those supposed live streams where people were tortured and killed for paying viewers. Most of the people there were just thrill seekers, treating it like an urban legend to dissect. Others, though, I wasn't so sure about them. I was scrolling through the usual conversations, seeing the same tired arguments, whether red rooms were real, if anyone had actually seen one, that kind of thing. I was about to log off when a new post popped up in the feed. It was just a single image, no caption, no context. A low-quality photo of someone sitting in a chair, hands bound behind them, something wrapped around their mouth. The lighting was bad, but I could tell it wasn't staged. The person looked genuinely terrified. At first, I thought it was just another shock post, one of those things meant to bait reactions. But then I looked closer. The face was partially in shadow, but I recognized the hoodie. It was identical to one my friend Charlie owned, black with a grey lining, a tiny rip near the pocket. The same hoodie I'd seen him wearing earlier that day. My stomach plummeted to the floor. It had to be a coincidence. Loads of people owned hoodies like that, and even if it was Charlie's, it didn't mean anything. Maybe someone had found a random image online that happened to show a guy wearing the same thing. I told myself that. I almost believed it too. But then I noticed something else. A detail so small I nearly missed it. On the edge of the frame, barely visible, was a section of wallpaper. yellowish with a faded floral pattern. I knew that wallpaper. I'd seen it hundreds of times. It was in Charlie's flat. I don't remember closing the chat. 1 second I was staring at that image, heart hammering so hard it made me feel sick. The next, I was grabbing my phone and calling Charlie. It rang and rang. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. That's when I noticed a new notification pop up on my screen. An email. No subject line, no text, just an attachment. The file name was my username from the chat room. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to open it, but I did. It was another photo. This time, it was taken from behind. The same room, the same chair. But now I could see a phone on a table nearby. The screen was lit up, displaying my name. My call, still ringing. I went cold all over. Someone was there. Someone was watching my call come through, and they wanted me to see that they were watching. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call the police, but what could I even tell them? That I'd been lurking in a shady chat room, and someone had posted a picture that might be my mate. They'd ask me how I'd found the site. They'd ask what I was doing there. I didn't have answers that wouldn't make me look just as guilty as whoever posted the image. So I did the only thing I could think of. I got in my car and drove. Charlie's flat wasn't far, just a 10-minute drive. I barely remember getting there, but I do remember the way my stomach twisted when I saw his front door. It was open, not wide, just slightly ajar, like someone had left in a hurry. I stepped inside. The flat was silent. Nothing looked out of place. No sign of a struggle, no broken furniture, no blood. Just that awful, stale silence. I checked every room. Nothing. Charlie was gone. I called the police in the end. I told them I hadn't heard from him and that his door was open, which was weird. They came, took a statement, looked around, but they didn't have much to go on. There was no sign of forced entry, nothing to suggest foul play, and I wasn't exactly eager to tell them about the chat room. Charlie was officially reported missing the next day. They investigated, asked questions. Weeks passed. Nothing. I kept going back to that chat room, hoping I'd find something, anything, that could lead me to him. But the post was gone. No trace of it ever existing. And the user who posted it, their account had been deleted. Charlie never turned up. No body, no leads, just gone. I tried to tell myself it wasn't him in the photo, that I'd jumped to conclusions. But I know what I saw. I know that was his flat. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder, if I hadn't hesitated, if I'd called the police straight away instead of wasting time driving over, would things have ended differently? Or was it already too late the moment I opened that chat room? I don't remember exactly how I got onto the site. That's probably the worst part of it. There wasn't some dramatic build-up, no moment where I knowingly crossed a line. I was just messing around, clicking through links on a dark web forum, half bored, half curious, and suddenly I was there. I wasn't looking for anything illegal. I've always had an interest in creepy internet rabbit holes, the kind of stuff you hear about, but never actually see. Red rooms, snuff films, black market auctions. I assumed most of it was urban legend, the kind of thing people claim to have seen, but never provide proof. But that night, I found a forum dedicated to something called The Arena. It looked like any other anonymous forum. Dark background, minimal text, dozens of cryptic usernames. The posts were vague, but the ones at the top had a lot of engagement. Replies full of numbers, countdowns, and strange shorthand. It took me a minute to realize they were talking about bets. I kept scrolling. The deeper I went, the worse it got. People weren't just watching, they were participating. There were discussions about contestants, arguments over match conditions, debates on whether blunt or edged weapons made for a better show. And then I saw the link. Live match. Entry fee 0.005 Bitcoin. It was stupid. I knew it was stupid. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you think you're safe behind a screen. I had some crypto left over from a sketchy VPN subscription, and before I could talk myself out of it, I copied the address, sent the payment, and clicked the link. The stream opened instantly. Grainy night vision footage. A concrete room, empty except for two figures standing opposite each other. No masks, no gimmicks, just two men, shirtless, barefoot, wearing the same blank expression, like they were dissociating before it even started. The chat exploded with messages. Left guy's done for. 100K on bald dude. Let's go. I remember thinking, this has to be fake. Then a voice came through, distorted, mechanical. It said something short and final, and without hesitation, the men started fighting. It was brutal. No choreography, no cinematic tension, just pure, unfiltered violence. They were hitting each other like animals, swinging wildly, no technique. I think that's what made it feel real. Fights in movies have rhythm, they have form. This was different, desperate, erratic, ugly. One of them fell, the other didn't stop. The chat went insane. Cheers, laughing emojis, money transfer confirmations. I just sat there, gripping my mouse so hard my fingers ached. Then the camera moved. At first I thought the stream had cut. Static flickered across the screen, the perspective shifting like the camera was being repositioned. Then I realized what I was looking at. The camera wasn't zooming out. It was turning, and it was facing a wall of monitors. The screens showed different angles of the fight, security footage from what looked like different locations, corridors, storage rooms, some sort of office space. And then, directly in the center, there was a live feed of me, my webcam. The air left my lungs. I sat there frozen, staring at my own face in the feed. The timestamp in the corner was correct. The slight tilt of my head, the way my eyes widened in realization. It was real time. I fumbled for my mouse, my hands suddenly damp with sweat. The cursor jittered across the screen as I tried to close the tab, but nothing responded. The chat was still moving, but now, amongst the usual betting slips and celebratory messages, I saw something new. New challenger? He looks confused. Somebody tell him the rules. And then, right at the bottom, check his IP. I slammed my laptop shut so hard I thought I cracked the screen. I ripped the battery out, physically unplugged my router, and just sat there, my chest rising and falling like I'd just run for my life. For the next hour, I just waited. No knocks on the door, no strange cars outside, just the deafening silence of my own paranoia. I wiped my hard drive the next morning, factory reset everything, threw out my webcam, even switched internet providers just to be safe. But the thing is, I don't think they needed to find me. I think they already knew. Because a week later, a package arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled across the top in shaky, uneven letters. Inside was a single item, a USB stick. I never plugged it in. I don't know how this ends. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I was just a spectator, some nobody who stumbled in and then out again, forgotten amongst a sea of faceless gamblers. Or maybe I'm still on their list. Maybe they're just waiting for the right match.